You're listening to It's Getting Better, a podcast about mental health, hope, and overcoming challenges. While this podcast is not intended to replace medical advice or professional help, we hope that the stories and experiences shared by young people can help you on your journey of getting better. I'm your host, Kate, and today I'm so excited to be joined by Eleanor, and I'm just going to pass the mic right over to her, and she's going to introduce herself and a little bit about her mental health experience.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eleanor. I'm 17, and I have generalized anxiety disorder. I got diagnosed when I was 13, a couple months after my older brother committed suicide. And once I got diagnosed, I was kind of looking back on the whole thing, and I was like, oh, I see it. Because, I'd be 6, and my mom would go to work twice, a week, and was gone past my bedtime, and I'd have full-on breakdowns and wouldn't be able to sleep because my mom wasn't there. And then, with suicide kind of exacerbates those things. It doesn't make it better. But after I got diagnosed, I got medication, I got in therapy. It's been 4 years, and here I am.
Awesome. That's a great introduction. Will you explain to us a little bit more about what anxiety looks and feels like for you, and kind of put us in your shoes for someone who maybe doesn't experience anxiety?
Anxiety, for me, I have generalized anxiety disorder as my official diagnosis. I think I fit a little bit better into the box of social anxiety disorder, but it's constant panic all the time. I one time saw a post on Tumblr that described it like you're being chased by very slow tigers because it's your fight or flight response in constant action and nothing there to activate it. So my anxiety, when I'm having an anxiety attack, for me, it's a lot of racing thoughts and a lot of feeling really shaky and really unstable. It's hard to focus. I get really sick to my stomach. My stomach I get so nauseous. It hurts so bad. Sometimes if I have enough of an anxiety attack, I will legitimately throw up. It's happened many times and it sucks. And that's usually the point where I'm like, okay, let's deal with this now. Let's find a solution to that issue. But usually before I was medicated, I would have anxiety attacks that lasted 3 days at a time. I'd get triggered by something at school. Someone would say or do something and it would completely throw me off. And then I literally wouldn't recover for almost 3 days. And now I have a couple a week, and they're usually more contained. I can get them back down within an hour or two, which still isn't great, but it's a lot better. Back to school sucks because it's been so bad to try and deal with the heavy change. Because having this structured life, now I'm stressed about everything I have to do all the time. And I'll be sitting in rehearsal, and it'll be the first time all day that I've sat down and relaxed. And then it's oh, cool. And I'm whoa, and it floods the whole system, and it's here's panic about everything and also nothing at all. You're just sitting down. Time to feel terrified. I say my anxiety is more social than generalized anxiety, because generalized anxiety disorder is classified by the nervousness and panic and fear of terrible things happening in everyday life. So it's oh my gosh, what if I left my oven on? I turned it off. I swear I turned it off, but I don't know. I'm not sure. And you're on the way to work and you have to turn around and go back home to make sure, that you actually turned your oven off. And that's less it for me. I more have anxiety focused really within my relationships with people. So it's a lot of doubt and not believing that people really like me, or that they really care about me or think about me, and that all of my friends are my friends just out of tolerance. They're there because I guess I'm she's entertaining, she's cool to be around, but if I just never showed up again, they wouldn't notice my absence or really care that much. And I have this constant need to perform, to be entertaining and be friendly and be accommodating. I feel a lot if I don't serve a use or a purpose, they won't want to keep me around. So if I'm not a good host, or I'm not a good, funny, friendly person, or I'm not super helpful and accommodating when they need someone to be helpful and accommodating, they'll just be wow, you're a terrible person, or oh, wow, I have no reason to be friends with you anymore because you're not serving me. And so they'll leave me. And I can get very triggered by little things. It's a lot of rejection-sensitive dysphoria, which is finding rejection in non-rejection things. So if I'm hey, friend, do you want to hang out today? And they're oh, sorry, I can't. I already have plans. Or, oh, sorry, I have this family thing. Maybe next time. Completely normal response, right? when I'm having an anxious day or an anxious moment, my brain will take that and be like, oh, wow, that was personal and they hate you personally. Or if I find out that my friend hung out with my other friend instead of me, or something, or they've been talking, or there was some discussion that they had that wouldn't involve me anyways that I wasn't a part of, I'm like, it's because they hate you and it's an active exclusion. And then there's a level of guilt from like, you're a bad person for feeling that way about your friends and for thinking your friends are so shallow and thinking so little of them. And it just like feeds itself on and on and on and on and on and on to believe that people never will or don't truly like me.
That sounds exhausting to deal with. You said that it was sort of exacerbated by your brother's death, right? And that whole experience, if you're comfortable with it, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So my brother served an LDS mission. When he got home for about 6 months, we were like best friends. Went everywhere together, did everything together. He took me to movies, introduced me to games, we exchanged books. He was like my best friend in the whole world. And then, he was an adult and he moved on with his life and he got into a relationship and I kind of lost him in that sense, and it was like sad. But then, he killed himself, which is hard enough on its own because grief is a killer. Grief itself can kill. It changes everything. My little brother, who didn't have depression, suffers from really bad depression now because of it. It gave my it can add to mental illness by itself. But since I'd been so close to him for so long, and then he was just like gone, first by leaving and just being a regular adult and then actually dying, it became really hard to believe that people would like stay around because this person I had been so close to was gone. And then shortly after my brother committed suicide, my parents divorced. And then my father was out of the picture. And it's like, okay, here's another person who was really close to me my whole life and like claimed they really loved me and was always really there for me, who's just like gone. And when it's two people in your direct family, it's hard to look at platonic relationships and just these people who have no commitment to you, no blood relation, no ties, nothing to actually really keep them there and believe that they're going to stay if the people who actually do have commitments to you don't. But besides that very personal point of it, grief in general is just a killer. It completely changes the way you look at life and the way you interact with yourself. And I think many people, mentally ill or not, have strong bouts of mental illness after experiencing a loss like that. Strong bouts of depression, obviously, anxiety, etc. Because it's traumatic regardless of how it happens and when.
Absolutely. Your points on grief and how it can affect you specifically and then also just people in general, I think they're very valuable. So you lose your brother, your parents get divorced, you get diagnosed with anxiety. Like, where do you go from there? Honestly, like, at what point did the upward climb start? Because you had this really tough time. And not to say that like, oh yeah, after that it was all great and fine. But like, I can imagine you hit this point where you were really low. And so how did you start kind of figuring out how to get better?
At some point, you stop having a choice. Because at some point after you go through a major loss specifically, your options are get better or like die, I guess, because that's not a problem that goes away. Mm-hmm. It's not like it's like, oh, well, once we fix it, because there's no fixing it. Mm-hmm. They're dead. And especially when you have long-term mental illness like me, and like, because people can have, situational based mental illness that can be dealt with and they can recover from. But when you have like a lifelong mental illness like I do, that's also not a problem that you really get to go away from. So I think at some point it just kind of started to happen, which sounds useless. But for a long time, it didn't. For a long time, it was just kind of stagnant. It was just kind of going through life and moving from day to day to day to day. I think for the first 3 to 4 months of my 8th grade school year, I was majorly depressed and came to school in pajamas like literally every day for like 4 months until one day I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, what are you doing? I was staring at myself in the mirror and I thought, you don't feel good about yourself anymore. You don't like yourself anymore. And I've always prided myself on like my self-confidence and my positivity and my sense of self in my body. And so to look at myself in the mirror and be like, you don't like yourself anymore was a bit of a wake-up call for me to have to start changing things. But for me, it was a lot of other people, not even telling them and not even having them solve my problems, but getting out with people, being out with people, having friends who I could be like creative with and having friends who would be like, oh, come do this thing with me. Come do that thing with me. Got me out of the house to recover from the grief. The anxiety itself, because that's the grief part. The anxiety, I got in therapy. I got diagnosed. And so the awareness of the issue was there. And that was a big relief because once I was like, oh, this is why I feel that way. This is why I do those things. It was a lot easier to go, okay, now that I know what this is, I know how to attack it. Because I can look at anxiety and say, I feel this way because of this thing, and that doesn't make it magically disappear. Like, just because I know why I'm feeling anxious, I don't suddenly stop feeling anxious. But I can go, okay, you feel anxious about this thing. Here's why that's irrational. Anyways, let's do something else now. The biggest key, it's 2 parts, I guess. The biggest key through moving forward after the grief was to just start moving. And the biggest piece to moving forward after anxiety was the awareness of it. Because I knew what I was battling with that specifically, and I could go, okay, let's go forward. You feel this way because of this reason. Let's do something to make yourself feel better.
That's really insightful. And I like what you said about sometimes you just have to start moving forward. And it's not an easy decision. Like, it's so hard. It's kind of a decision that happens again and again every time you get invited out with friends or whatever it is. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that like being creative with friends was really valuable to you. And I would love to hear more about that, like how both being with friends and then also being creative and that kind of combination, like maybe what that did for you or what that was like for you.
Art is my coping mechanism for sure. And not even just like traditional art. I'm a writer and I'm an actor. I do musical theater and I creative write for pleasure. And both of those things are highly social activities for me. Theater, obviously, but writing was because the friends I made in junior high and I've maintained are also all big creatives and writers. And so we'd write stories together and we'd just do it just because it was fun, you know? It would be a good way to get out of my head and to like explore all these new realities and new possibilities and feel freed. And then I look back on it now, having been years later, and I look at a character that I crafted and I go, oh, you were me processing my trauma. You were a therapeutic outlet, because everybody says writing is therapeutic, but like I had a character we made who wasn't even the one I designed. My friend designed her. And I looked back and I realized I'd made this character who had an older brother who had this really deep and personal relationship and friendship with her older brother and admired her older brother. And it feels so obvious when I describe it that way. But as I was making her, I didn't even think about it because it was like, oh, aha, what if this? What if that? And then I look back at it as a whole and I'm like, well, there's you processing trauma. And it didn't just apply to me because I'd look at characters my friends had made. And, you know, one of my friends was having a really hard time with her dad at the time. And she had made this character who was having a really hard time with his dad and had this really hard relationship with his dad. But like at heart, his dad was a good person and was trying to be there for him. And this character just couldn't see all the things his dad was doing because he had these preconceived notions about him being a bad person. And I'm like, well, there's her processing her trauma. And then, you know, I write on my own and the same thing happens. And then theater. I do theater with a group that is like in another county over. And we got in like right after my brother died. And I love it there because theater is a way for me to like get up on stage and I'm not myself. I'm up there and I'm someone new and I have a different life. And I have a different goals and whatever. And it's not even like, oh, I'm escaping myself. Because there's also a certain level of pride of like, yeah, I just did that. Look at how cool that was. And, you know, people come to see my shows and will say all these amazing things about how good it was. And I'm like, thank you. But like, it's easier to sing in front of a huge crowd of people on a stage as a character than it is for me to get up in front of a bunch of people in front of my church and sing in church as myself. It's the same thing. In fact, there's sometimes more people and like the people I sing in front of a church, I know all of them and they're all nice and they would never say anything bad about me. And the people that come to my shows don't know me at all and have no tie to me and could be horrible. And yet it's so much easier to get up in front of the complete strangers in this persona, I think, because it's like, first of all, it's therapeutic in the same way. I've played characters that have had situations similar to mine or emotions similar to mine, and I've been able to put some of my own emotion into that, which you're supposed to do in theater anyways, is put yourself into the character and take your own experiences to build the character, which is inherently very therapeutic. But that I've been able to process stuff by doing that same thing, you know? And getting up there and infusing like, here's a life experience I've had. This character has someone important to them who died. Now I can think of my brother. And it not only adds to the performance, but it's just like healthy for me. And I think there's also a certain level of getting out of myself because the person I don't like and that I believe everyone else doesn't like is me. I don't think that people care about me or like me, but I get up there and I'm playing somebody else and there's no reason people don't like that person. And it's nice to just explore new worlds for a couple hours and then come out of it on the other side and look at the ways I'm same to that person and go, maybe if people like this person, maybe they like me too.
I think it's cool that art has been therapy for you in like a lot of different ways and that it's been, you know, such an important part of your life.
Art is, I think, a tool that everybody uses and more people use than they realize because art doesn't have to be creative. It's just the act of creation. And I think one of the best things you can do to cope when you are going through mental illness or grief or whatever is art. And whatever that means to you. Because I mean, my mom is a costume designer. which is a wildly different art form than writing or acting. And my best friend is a digital artist, which is a wildly different art form. I have another friend who plays a lot of video games. And that the way they work through them is artistic because they don't just play. There's like strategy. They do research. They create. It's how can I do it the fastest way possible? There's a certain elegance. But I think the act of creation, it's a good coping mechanism. I see it work for a lot of people in a lot of different ways.
I think it's so healing to so many people. And whether or not they realize it, having something that you can look at and say, I made that, I did that, it's like mine in a way. Like
when you're depressed or anxious, to say like, but look what I made, but look what I did, but look what I've contributed.
Exactly. I'm going to pivot us a little bit for the last couple minutes. I want to talk a little bit more about, I mean, you've had these experiences that have really contributed to your understanding of mental illness and how it, is part of our community and part of our experience as young people. The conversations that I've had with you about it have been so valuable to my own understanding of it. I want to ask you how you think we can support one another better as Gen Z, and also like, what do you see in our society, in our community that you think needs to be changed? What do you think we can do to like address these mental health problems that we're seeing so common in our generation?
My little brother and I go to a grief group for like a youth grief group for obvious reasons. And one of their rules is at the sharing place, we say died. You don't say someone passed away or that they were lost. And they say it's because it's confusing to little kids. Because if you have a 4-year-old who's in there and you say, oh, we lost her dad, the question is like, okay, let's go find him. Let's go get him back. If he's lost, we just have to find him, right? Or if they passed away, it's like, okay, they went away. When are they coming back, So that's like a rule set in place to just create a certain level of understanding and openness. And I think that rule should apply to everything. I think we should say died everywhere. There's this dance we do socially. And our generation is better about it than older generations, but there's this social dance of like, I can't say anything that's upsetting to anybody else. Especially for mentally ill people, when you hate yourself so much and you want other people to like you so much for whatever reason, or you don't believe that people like you, you don't want to say anything upsetting. You don't want to say anything that might make someone else uncomfortable or make them not feel good, because that's bad and it makes you a bad person. But so there's this like circles we run around each other to try and talk without actually talking about it. To try and say and communicate what we need to say without like saying the words. We just gotta say the words. Because when we're blunt like this, and I can get here and without having to preface and be like, well, this thing happened to my brother and he was really depressed and he passed away. He had this, he died from his depression. I can say, yeah, my brother shot himself. He was sad. He was in an abusive relationship. He shot himself. And it's so freeing for both, I think, me as the individual to just say, yeah, he killed himself. And then the person I'm talking to, because if I just say that, initially it's probably uncomfortable. It's probably not a fun thing to hear because it throws a lot at you. But if I can just say it, it frees up the other person to also just say it. Mm-hmm. And they don't have to dance in circles around, am I going to say something that's going to upset her? Am I going to do something that's going to make her, re-bring up these bad things for her? So I'm like, yeah, I'm stupidly anxious all the time. Or like, yeah, when people say these things, it makes me anxious. It's not to guilt them. But then my friends can be like, okay, and we can all talk about it freely without having to worry about, is something going to hurt someone? Because also then if something hurts someone, you just say that. And it's way easier said than done. It's way easier said than done because these are social niceties that have been in place for a very long time. And they're not comfortable topics. It's not like we don't talk about them just for social niceties and like they're so easy to talk about. If we would just do it, they're hard to talk about. Any sense, all the time. But the more we just talk about them, I think the easier it gets.
Yes, I want to shout that from the rooftops. The first step to actually doing anything about these issues that so many kids are facing, so many of us are facing, is just talking about it and just acknowledging it in a real way and not what
was the guy who fought Medusa? Perseus, right? But if whoever just walked into the cave to battle Medusa, to fight the Gorgon, turned to stone, dead. Just like everyone else before him. But because he talked with people and he knew what he was battling, he knew how to fight it and he knew how to protect himself from it, and he won because he knew what he was battling. And if we don't talk about mental illness and we don't talk about these things, we don't know what we're fighting. We have a vague idea, but we don't know what it is. And that applies on a interpersonal and intrapersonal scale, because The people around you have to know just as much as you have to know because it's a group effort.
We spend so much time trying to like wrap up mental illness in this beautiful little bow that we can like, talk about easily and explain easily and pretend that there's easy solutions and it's temporary and like blah, blah, blah. All of these things that we say that prevent us from actually like really getting to the nitty gritty of like, what is this like? What does it feel like? What can we do? I think what you're saying about like, we try to make it sound so much more simple and like clear cut than it is also creates like problem in the social structures. Then it becomes kind of like almost cute to like have depression. And it's like, because we talk about it in this like, simple, like oversimplified way, then it almost becomes like trendy.
It becomes something easy to digest. And since it's something easy to digest, it's easy to make something out of. It's like that weird trend on TikTok where a bunch of people were like faking Tourette's because they was like quirky. And it's like, we dumbed it down so much that it had become so commodifiable and so it becomes so easily consumable that people just consumed it. And it's like, yes, we want it to be something you can talk about and something you can understand, but it's not just so clear cut. Also, because when we tell people like this is exactly what depression is and anxiety is for everybody, then someone who has depression or anxiety in a different way is like, oh, guess I don't. And then they're left stranded.
It's a problem for both the people who have depression and are being told that they maybe don't, and then also for the people who don't necessarily and like want to. It's terrifying.
I wish I was depressed. No, you don't. It's not like I'm a sad little bean burrito. I don't know. People are like, oh, wrapped up on my couch all sad. It's like I haven't showered in a week and my sheets smell bad and I smell bad, but I don't care enough about myself to do it. It's a whole different ballpark than just like I get sad sometimes. Or like, because some people feel depressed sometimes. Like, oh, I have depression. It's like, yes, everybody feels depressed sometimes. But depression and anxiety disorders versus just having anxious moments are way different. Which is part of the reason I tell people I have general anxiety disorder, not social anxiety disorder. Because if I say, oh, I've got social anxiety, people are like, oh, everyone has social anxiety. Me too. And I'm like, no, you get scared to talk in front of the teacher. I throw up because I think everyone hates me. Like, and I'm not saying it's not valid that you feel that way. Because it is, but like they're very different things and it's just easier to tell people like I have a different anxiety disorder than I do because it's so commodifiable that people don't treat it seriously.
Exactly. I feel like it's such a terrifying and frustrating problem because we have created among, ourselves like this, okay, this is what it is. And we have these definitions and in order to communicate, you have to use the definition that people understand, like generalized anxiety disorder. You have to use that one for people to understand what you're trying to say, even if it isn't actually accurate for you. You have to like match the vocabulary and it's really frustrating.
You have to cater to the people who don't have these problems and don't understand it rather than being the one being catered to as the one with the actual problem. And I think that goes to anything out of the norm. You have to cater to the people who don't suffer, which is so backwards.
I have one more question for you because I don't want to go too long. The final question is just, what advice do you have for other teens who are trying to get better, who are on the road of getting better? And alternatively, what advice would you give to your younger self?
To get better, like I said earlier, you have to start. And then you have to start again. And then you have to start again and again and again and again. It's a lifelong process. Especially, like I said, when it's something that's a part of you and not just a moment, you will always be getting better. But I don't think that's a bad thing because I think lots of people talk about, oh, I'm going in circles. But really what it is a spiral staircase. You feel like you're at the same point you were before. And maybe you are, but you are much further along than you were when you were originally there, So just keep starting. It's exhausting, but just keep moving towards that light. Because things will always get brighter. Even if you never make it out the door, things will always get brighter. And that's better than sitting in the dark. And also, make art. Eat figs, make art, be happy.
And be Greek. No, just
kidding. And be Greek! Be Greek!